Hello, welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to discuss with you the difference between soft and oil pastels. I hope this video will help you to choose the material for your art if you want to try pastels in your drawing. Pastel is a drawing block made up of pigment. Oil pastels are made from pigment, binder and oil. Soft pastels have the same composition except for the oil. Features of the composition of these materials determine the differences. First of all, this is expressed in the texture. Oil pastel is a soft, thick material, while soft pastels are similar in texture to chalk. It's crumbly and powdery. The texture expression and its variation depends on the type of pastel and its manufacturer. So there are soft, hard and extra soft pastels. But we will not discuss this issue in this video because it's too broad topic. For the comparison, we will focus on the brand of pastel and its soft version. In our case, it's a Manga Gallery Oil Pastel and Manga Gallery Soft Pastels. Let's consider working with pastels in a dry way. You may notice that working with soft pastels leaves a dusty residue. At the same time, the pigment itself is bright and saturated. There are different ways to apply material to paper. You can use shading and apply the pigment softly, translucently or gently and thickly. Another option is to apply with the side of crayon, creating large strokes of the material. You can also apply the pigment lightly and translucently, or thickly and densely in this way. When you work in with oil pastels, the trace remains dust-free. It's thick and soft, and at the same time it's not inferior to the saturation of soft pastels. The pigment can be applied lightly, translucently, or thickly or densely. There are techniques in which the material is applied pastelsely in thick layer, creating the effect of the thick smear of oil paint. This is done using a painting knife and a large amount of material. In this way we can detect different textures on the paper. In the first case it's lighter and more velvety, while the oil pastels create a viscous, opaque layer without crumbling. Priority in this regard depends on the specific task in painting or the artist's preferences. Another important part of working with this material is how it's shaded and blended. Soft pastels are easy to shade and distribute on paper. It can be shaded with varying degree of saturation loss. A variety of materials can be used to blend. It can be pencil, charcoal sticks, special tools for rubbing, or the most convenient tool for this, your finger. The use of each material produces a different result. Oil pastels also blend well, but it takes more effort to blend them. If soft pastel is just a pigment that you rub on paper, then oil pastel is a thick material, so its distribution is different. For oil pastels, it's also possible to use different tools, but the gentlest distribution of the material is possible by simply rubbing with your finger. Both soft and oil pastels can be worked in several layers. You can both cover the top with a different color pigment and deepen the saturation of the original shade. At the same time, the material allows you to mix colors by adding them with the next layer. The difference in working with layers is that soft pastel can withstand more layers, while oil pastel begin to peel off previous layers when applied multiple times. However, it's worth bearing in mind that both types of pastels withstand a limited number of layers. There is no freedom in working with these materials, as there is in painting with oil paints. Therefore, when painting with pastels, you need to think more about sequence of actions than when working with oil. It can be noted that the race of blending and shading soft pastels also mean that the drawing created with them it's easy to damage. It's easy wiped and smeared. Therefore, an important feature of working with this material is the accuracy. because during the walk it's easy to damage the drawing by touching it with your hand or incorrectly sweep away the crumbling pigment. Working with oil pastels is easy in this respect. The drawing is not easily damaged, but there is still a risk. The pigment can also be smeared by hand during walk. Nevertheless, if there are any error that needs to be corrected, then in the initial stages of the walk it can be corrected easily. The soft pastel walk is corrected using brushes, which can be used to sweep away the pigment almost completely, if for example you have chosen the wrong color. Another way to do this is to use an ordinary eraser or kneaded eraser. Oil pastels are more difficult to remove from paper. You can't brush it off, but it also uses an eraser and a putty rubber to correct the drawing. Nevertheless, you need to be careful with this material because the eraser can not only remove the pigment from the paper but also smudge it. Dense layers of materials are better removed by scraping with a palette knife and only afterwards using an eraser. Using an oil pastel, the putty rubber will only be able to pick up the excess pigment. In general, while working with pastel, adjustments are mainly made on the first layers, because it's difficult to correct multi-layer work with these methods. There are other techniques besides the classic dry application of pastels. Both pastels can be used wet. Soft pastel is washed out like watercolor with water or alcohol. The oil pastels are blurred using oil paint thinner. There is also a technique in which the paper is wet before work, which gives the pastel a different application. The sheet is wet with water for soft pastels. With oil pastels, oil is used. The scrabbling method is also applicable for oil pastels. When applying multiple coats of material, you can scrape material from the top layer to reveal the color of the bottom layer. The surface on which the artist will be working deserves special attention in working with the pastels. Special pastel paper, velvet paper, and sandpaper are used for soft pastels. This is because this material requires a surface in which the pigment will fall through. The type of work as well as the brightness of the crayons and the texture of the drawing depends largely on the paper used by the artist. Therefore, it can be argued that soft pastels is quite demanding material for paper. Oil pastels are less demanding to the surface to paint on, but the result also depends on what the artist is painting on. However, this type of pastels can be drawn on a variety of paper, cardboard, glass, and even wood and canvas. However, the surface also determines the longevity of the work. But it's better to use thick paper or pastel paper. Tinted paper is often used for working with pastels. Artists also use the technique of thinly layering the pastels on colored white paper, which shines through the strokes of feathering. There are techniques by which paper is prepared for further work. For example, some painters make an underpainting in watercolor or gouache and only then apply new layers of pastels on the dried surface. This technique is applicable to both soft pastels and oil pastels. Preservation of drawing is another significant issue regarding working with pastels. A fixative is usually used to secure pastel drawings, which is a special varnish that allows the pigment to blend to the paper. However, artists argue about the use of this type of pastel fixation. First, the fixative makes the color of the work darker. Secondly, there is a risk of spoiling the work when applying varnish. Third, the pastel loses its texture. These claims apply more to soft pastels through the application of fixative also affects the work done with oil pastels. That's why pastel works are framed under glass for preservation without contact with it. However, there is no doubt that oil pastels have a great adhesion to the paper and it's more difficult to damage it. It's worth considering that it's not always possible to keep work on the glass, especially during the study drawing stages. Therefore, there is a method of storing in separate files and folders, or in folders by tracing the work with tracing paper. Oil pastels are considered to be teaching materials, while soft pastels are considered to be professional ones. However, I don't think you need to focus on it when you choose the material. You can use any material for your creativity and make great artwork. But it's true that oil pastels are great for quick walks and sketches. It doesn't crumble and it's easy to take with you and make quick sketches. Soft pastels seem to require more concentration, but it doesn't prevent you from sketching with this material as well. I briefly introduce you to the features of the materials and try to present you the differences. I think you can decide which material is right for your artwork based on that. But it's better to try both types of pastels, even if you do not continue working with it. It will be a useful skill and creative development. Because you need to learn and adapt to any new material when you work with it. I'm going to draw two similar images, but using different materials to demonstrate differences to you. That way you can clearly see the differences in materials. I hope this video was helpful to you and you were able to find the answers to the questions you were looking for. Share with me in comments which pastel do you like more. Thank you for your attention. See you.